Hey brothers and sisters, welcome back to Solomon's Temple. Solomon was the son of King David and had grown to become a great king himself. Solomon was a very wise king and he did many great things. But the greatest work of Solomon's reign was the building of the house Yahuah, which was called the Temple. Solomon planned it very carefully because building the temple was very important. It mattered a lot to Solomon because his father, King David, had wanted to build the temple and had prepared for it by gathering lots of gold, silver, stone, and cedar.
Cedar wood.
Solomon knew how much the temple mattered to his dad, and he also knew how much it mattered to Yahuah. So building the temple mattered to Solomon very much as well. He took great care to make sure everything was perfect. The temple stood on Mount Moriah, which is the exact place where Abraham took his son Isaac to be sacrificed, the place where Solomon's father, David, had built an altar and Yahuah appeared to him. This was a very important place designed for a very important task. Building Yahuah's house, the trees for the roof were brought from faraway lands, and all the stones for the building of the temple were chiseled and shaped and fitted together before they were even brought to Mount Moriah. And all the carved and made all the beams for the roof and pillars of cedar were carved and made to join each other. This was so that as the walls arose, no sounds of hammers or chisels were heard. Yahuah's house was built very quietly because building Yahuah's temple for praise and sacrifice was so important to Solomon. He used the finest materials to build it. The walls were covered with pure gold. He decorated it with precious gems. Nothing was too good for Yahuah's house. It took King Solomon and his men 7 years to build the temple, but at last it was finished, and when it was done, Solomon brought all the things his dad, King David, had gathered for the temple, the gold, the silver, and all the furniture. Then he had the Ark of the Blood Covenant brought to the temple where it would sit in a place of great honor in the house of Yahuah. Finally, Solomon held a great ceremony to let the people know that the temple was ready. Solomon's greatest work was complete. He cared about the house of Yahuah. He cared about praising and sacrificing to Yahuah. So Yahuah used Solomon to build his temple where your people could worship the one true Elohim. Isn't that amazing? I love you all. Now here's my dad.
Woohoo! That was good, mate. Fantastic. So, everybody, we've looked at how David came to the inspiration of wanting to build Yahuah a house. And Yahuah said, no, I'm going to build you one. And then his son Solomon ended up building the temple. But David put all the preparation in. He pulled all his contacts. He made deals and everything with everybody to gather. And we're going to see a lot of that today. How he collected all these resources. Today we're talking about the temple materials. We've looked at the man David, we've looked at the man Solomon, their characteristics and how a lot of it, most of what they were doing shadowed the role of Yahusha Messiah in our lives. So today we want to actually start getting into the temple itself, since this is the Solomon's temple study. Let's look at the temple materials. To start with, we've got the temple site. The site of the temple was the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. And here David erected an altar to Yahuah at his command, in order to stop the plagues that came after he numbered his people, instead of trusting Yahuah for victory. And here Yahuah answered David by fire from heaven on the ascending near burnt and intimate peace offerings that David offered. In due time, Solomon would build the house of Yahuah in Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, on this very site of the threshing floor. We will go into more of these things in greater detail as we go on. We're going to be doing a bit of summarizing here today of the furniture and different things. The temple, this was interesting, the temple was on the boundary line between Judah and Benjamin, and so it formed a link between the northern and southern tribes, almost in the center of the nation. Very cunning of David. Look at this. You know about the split, the northern 10 tribes and the southern 2 tribes. Well, if they'd put the temple sort of up here, it would have been favoritism going, or down here, favoritism down. So look where Jerusalem is. It's almost on this border. These borders aren't exactly accurate, so it's pretty much in the middle of both. So it's a bit of a Switzerland sort of going on. Formed a link between the northern and southern tribes, almost in the center of the nation. So none could pull favoritism, none could make dominant stand out. This temple was about Yahuah, not about whose tribe it belonged to, or north or south, or all that madness. So that was the temple site. The temple site was on the threshing floor of Araunah. The temple structure. The general plan of the temple was the same as that of the tabernacle of Yahuah, built by Moses, but on a larger and much grander scale. It makes sense. Yahuah wouldn't have all these different patterns, would he? It's one pattern. It just gets grander and grander. Started with an altar. Then it went to a sort of a burning bush where he appeared. Then it went to a tabernacle, and then it's gone to a temple. It's on a much larger and grander scale. Actually, its measurements were a little more than double than the wilderness tabernacle. So all the measurements, when you look at all the measurements in Moses' tabernacle, double it for the temple. The temple proper was built of hewn stones, and these stones were made ready in the quarries before being brought to the temple site, so that neither sound of hammer nor axe nor any tool was heard in the building. A silent construction. Have you ever heard of such a thing? A silent construction. The temple measured 32 meters long, 11 meters wide, and 16 meters high, and was divided into 2 places, respectively, called the set-apart place and the oracle, or most set-apart place, either. These 2 places were divided by folding doors made of olive wood and ornamented with carvings of cherubim, palms, and open flowers. They were hung on hinges of gold. These doors into the most set-apart place also had a veil associated with them, similar in material and ornamentation to the veil in the tabernacle of Moses. The entrance into the set-apart place also had folding doors made of fir wood, with doorposts of olive wood, and ornamented in the same manner as the doors into the most set-apart place, which was a cube, 20 cubits square, 10 cubits above it in the remaining height of the temple proper, was used as the treasury, forming the upper chambers. I'm skimming through this a bit because some of these parts of the temple we will be going into in greater detail. The walls inside the temple were lined with timber so as to cover the stones, the walls and roof being covered with cedar, and the floors with fir timber. The side walls were covered over with carved works of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. At the top of the walls there were latticed windows, probably for ventilation, to admit light and allow the smoke of incense and burning lamps to ascend. Everything within the temple was overlaid with thin plates of gold. as well as the floor, the ceiling, and walls. That's overkill, isn't it? Gold, floor, ceiling, walls, everything. Gold. Just think of it from an interior design point of view. That's like full-on shine, full-on bling, isn't it? For a reason. The porch and the pillars in front of the temple, and joined to it was the porch, 11 meters wide, 5 meters deep, 16 meters high, the height of the temple itself. So when you see these pictures of this huge ziggurat type, skyscraper at the front of the temple, not accurate. The porch, pillars and everything were about the same height as the temple. In front of the porch also stood two great bronze pillars called Jachin and Boaz, richly ornamented, standing as monuments, not for support. They were monuments. And there's the base of them. Then we had the priest's chambers. Around the sides and back of the temple walls was built a 3-storied building containing rooms for the priests. These were used as priests' chambers, temple stores for furniture and other things for temple services. This 3-storied building was not part of the temple proper, but actually leaned against the walls. These chambers were entered by means of a door into the passage and by winding stairs. The whole house was overlaid with gold plates, and the temple glittered in the sunlight, dazzling the eyes of all who approached it. That was the point of this. Not only, as we know, the esteem of Yahuah was the main source of light and, Shekinah and peace and prosperity and wonderful love coming from the temple, but the actual aesthetics itself were glistening, dazzling in the eyes of all who approached it. Then we had the temple courts. So you can see here, we've got the set apart place here. We had the oracle, or the most set apart place. Now we're dealing with the outer court here, where we have the altar and the brass sea, molten sea. Number 5, the temple courts. Surrounding the sanctuary as a whole were 2 great courts called the inner court and the outer court. Great court. The inner court running around the temple was reserved exclusively for the priests. Inner court reserved exclusively for the priests. It was formed by a boundary wall made of 3 layers of hewn stones and a row of cedar beams, apparently laid on top of the stones for protection and beautification. Outside of this was the outer or great court, intended for the use of the people, the Israelites, apparently surrounded by a stone wall with gates. In Jeremiah 36, the court of the priests is called the higher court, indicating that it was on a higher level than the outer or great court. The temple and its courts had a terraced setting and aspect to anyone approaching. So you've got some ideas here. You've got, see how it's higher up around here and down here. The temple furniture. In the most set apart place was placed the ark with its mercy seat, which was taken from the tabernacle of David on Mount Zion. The ark was placed between the 2 great cherubim, each over 5 meters tall, made of olive wood and overlaid with gold. Their wings were outstretched, each being nearly 3 meters long, touching each other, overshadowing the ark of Yahuah, while the outer wings touched the side walls of the most set apart place. So you can see here the wings touched each other, and the wings also touched the wall practically, overlooking the ark. This is in the oracle here, the most set apart place. They stood on their feet. This is the cherubim. They stood on their feet with their faces towards the set apart place. In the set apart place was the golden altar of incense made of cedar wood. We're talking about the next area here. You've got the most set apart place here. Now we're talking about the set apart place here, where we have the golden incense, which is there, made of cedar wood, overlaid with gold. It stood before the set apart place for the daily burning of incense and for use on the great day of atonement. Then there were 10 golden candlesticks, 10 this time, not just one, with their 7 lamps. These were placed 5 on each side, on the right and the left of the set apart place. 5 on that side and 5 on this side. And we're going to look into these a bit further and understand why we need 10. Then there were 10 tables of showbread also, 5 being placed on each side of the set apart place. In the outer court was the great altar of brass. We saw last week how huge that altar was. The little man standing next to it. Huge altar of brass, the altar of burnt offering. Its measurements were 11 meters squared, 5 meters high, made after the pattern of the brass altar in the tabernacle of Moses. Same pattern, much bigger. The various vessels belonging to this altar were of brass also. Brass, of course, being about judgment. Between the altar and the porch stood the great molten or brazen sea. This one here. A huge round basin of water replacing the brazen lava of the tabernacle of Moses. This was for the priests to wash there before entering the services of Yahuah in the temple proper. Then on each side of the altar of brass, on the right side and left side of the temple, were 10 smaller brazen lavas on wheels, these being for the washing of the sacrifices for the altar. So we're just breezing through the furniture just to give a bit of an overview at this point. Number 7, the temple dedication. The temple was dedicated during the feast of the 7th month, which we know as Tabernacles, amidst much prayer and dedicatory offerings. Yahuah sealed the dedication of his house with the descent of the Shekinah esteemed fire, and dwelt among his redeemed people who he loves. That's how they knew he'd arrived. The fire came down, the Shekinah. They couldn't even stand to do their priestly services. See there? It's all happening. They're taking the ark in to be its final home, final resting place after wandering around for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that was the furniture, all that stuff. Let's talk about this. We should recognize that the real understanding of the temple and its furnishings is founded upon a working knowledge of the tabernacle of Moses. And I've been talking about that furniture for a few years now in the different studies we've been doing. That's why I've just breezed through this at this point. We know a fair bit about the furniture and what it stood for. Inner court, outer court, most set apart place. So to understand the temple, you need to have an understanding of the furniture from the tabernacle, because it's the same furniture practically. The temple is identified with this tabernacle and replaces it on a much larger and grander scale. The truths, as found in the tabernacle, its furnishings and measurements with their details, will be amplified into fuller light and esteem, more beauty and harmony as we go on and compare both tabernacle and temple, since both were of heavenly order and pattern. The earthly tabernacle and temple were but shadows of the heavenly tabernacle and temple, but there is only one pattern. Yeah? Only one pattern. Yahuah had one purpose in mind. What was it? We're going to find out. So now we're going to do a bit of a comparison between the tabernacle and temple in regards to all these different topics. Firstly, the temporary and the permanent. So let's look at the tabernacle and the temple in the context of being temporary and permanent and what that means. Firstly, the tabernacle speaks of that which is temporary and transitional, because it's a tent. Israel as a nation wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. They were pilgrims and strangers in the earth, just like us. In due time, they possessed the land of promise, and the tribes were allotted their inheritances. The tabernacle functioned over many years during the formation of the young nation under the theocracy prior to the monarchy. So, this tabernacle did them up until they had a king, and it was still functioning under King David as well. He didn't really like it too much. That's why he brought in his own praise tent and got the ark shifted over to there. But that speaks of temporariness, moving around, pilgrims and strangers. Now let's look at the temple. It speaks of permanent The land had been won. Journeys were over. Battles had been fought and victories won. This is not just a small matter. I mean, this is the promise. I mean, we spent lots of time with Abraham when we were going through the scriptures, and that was his main promise. A land of your own. A family, not only a family, a nation of your own, from your own loins. This was his promise, and it's happened. And how do the people feel? Do they even care about Abraham, the promises, the covenant? The land had been won, journeys were over. Yahuah kept his promise. Battles had been fought and victories won. All enemies were under their feet. With the rise of the monarchy, the tribes were established as a united kingdom under David's blood covenant. The temple would become the center of the nation's life and their worship of Yahuah, who had gone from tent to tent and one tabernacle to another, but now he would dwell in a house, in a more permanent dwelling place amongst his own. This was a huge deal. Sadly, we know what happens in 400 or 500 years, around the time Solomon died. We're not looking at that right now. We're looking at what a monumental shift this was, from being permanent, moving around, sheepskin, animal skin, all that sort of stuff, to an actual brick, mortar, gold, silver building. This was huge. The difference between being temporary and permanent. The ark was finally going to be rested. Now let's look at the tabernacle and temple in regards to Yahusha and his assembly. Firstly, the tabernacle primarily speaks of Yahusha and only secondarily points to his bride. Why? Because there was only one ark, one gold altar of incense, one golden lampstand, one table of showbread, one brazen altar, one brazen laver. The whole emphasis is in the number one, all of which points to Yahushua Messiah, because he is the only one. He is the one and only way to the Father. He's the one and only way to the Father. There is only one mediator between Yahuah and mankind, for Yahusha is the one and only Savior. There was only ever one tabernacle in the wilderness, and all knew that there was only one way to Yahuah, same as there is today. There was only one high priest who functioned in this sanctuary, Aaron. All other Levitical priests were lesser priests. So Yahusha is the one and only high priest, and all other believers are lesser priests of that body, of which Messiah is the head. So, the tabernacle with all its ones and singular items and furniture speaks of Yahusha. But let's look at the temple. This was interesting. Why did he need 10 of this and 10 of that and so many of this and a huge, above ground pool and all this sort of stuff? Why was the altar so big? Look, the temple also spoke of Yahusha, but more especially of him in his assembly. See the difference? Tabernacle was about Yahusha, shadow of Yahusha, and the temple is a shadow of Yahusha in his assembly. Why? There are things in the temple, as in the tabernacle, that speak of the one Messiah, and they could not be duplicated. However, there are things in the temple that speak of the assembly and Yahusha's workings in it as his set-apart temple. In the temple there was only one and same ark. It's the same ark. There's only one of them. There's only one golden altar of incense. There was only one brazen altar and molten sea, swimming pool. All those, again, spoke of Yahusha as the one way to Yahuah, the one deliverer and mediator and sacrifice in one redemptive work. So that hasn't changed from the tabernacle of the temple. However, there were 10 tables of showbread, 10 brazen lavers in the set-apart place and outer court, respectively. There were also 10 golden lampstands in the set-apart place. Then there was the court for the priests and the court for the Israelites, allowing for a greater company of worshippers. And again, the temple measurements were twice the size. Again, the temple measurements were twice the size of those of the tabernacle of Moses. The temple therefore spoke of a double portion. All the measurements are doubled. A double portion, which of course points to Yahusha and his bridal assembly, his fellowship, the head and the body, brought together in one. We also have in the temple order the 24 courses of the priesthood were established, day and night in their orders. The temple was stamped with the significant number 24. The contrast is seen in the fact that the tabernacle of Moses was stamped with the number 12 and its significance. When you look at the measurements and a lot of the things that were going on, there's a lot of 12s. Temple, 24s, lots of them. Double portion. Again, 2 times 2, 24, and speaks of the double portion service of Yahusha and his assembly in priestly function. So, interesting, but the difference between the tabernacle and the temple. Yahusha is still the same. The ark cannot be replaced. It's still the same. Now we come to the tabernacle and temple materials. What was the difference between the tabernacle and temple? 1. The tabernacle in the wilderness was characterized by timber, acacia wood, overlaid with gold or brass. Other materials involved were silver, fine linen, and precious stones. The priest ministered on the desert floor. All spoke of pilgrimage and wilderness wanderings on the way to the promised land of rest. All spoke of that which was transitional and temporary. But the temple, in contrast, was characterized by stone, timbers of fir, cedars and olive wood, overlaid with gold and beautified by ornamentation. Gold, silver, brass, iron, as well as precious stones were also involved. Here the priests ministered on a gold floor, a bit different to the desert floor. Gold floor. Surely this points to the foursquare city of Yahuah, where the streets are paved with transparent gold. The temple speaks of both time and eternity. The temple speaks of both time and eternity. The city of Yahuah is garnished with 12 precious stones. Big difference there between the tabernacle and temple, wasn't it? Then we have the Feast of Pentecost and tabernacles. In the tabernacle pattern was given to Moses by revelation, as we know, at Mount Sinai during the Feast of Pentecost, the 3rd month after the Passover Exodus. At the dedication of the tabernacle of Yahuah at Mount Sinai, the Shekinah esteem came down and filled the tabernacle so that none could serve in the sanctuary. That's the tabernacle, which happened at Pentecost. But the temple dedication took place in the Feast of Tabernacles, the 7th month, not the Feast of Passover or Pentecost. And again, the esteem of Yahuah came down and filled the house so that none could enter in or serve in the sanctuary. Interesting. Then we look at prayer and praise. The tabernacle sacrifices were ascending daily on the brazen altar, the ascending incense from the golden altar and the burning lamps of the lampstand. Otherwise, all was still and quiet in the sanctuary services. Got that? It's a very solemn, quiet service in Moses' tabernacle. Everything was done very quietly. But the temple sacrifices were ascending daily also, as well as the incense and the burning lamps. But here we have the order of the Levitical singers and musicians and their ascending sacrifices of praise. The tabernacle was prayer, while the temple was praise in the priestly courses. So another difference between the tabernacle and the temple. Then we have the priest and the king. The tabernacle is emphatically associated with the office of the high priest and the Levitical priests. They go hand in hand, don't they? None could approach Yahuah in his tabernacle in the wilderness apart from the priestly service. But the temple, in contrast, cannot be thought of without thinking of King Solomon also. The offices of king and priest are brought together into sharper focus in a very real way in the service of the temple. Righteous kings and righteous priests work together in the maintenance of the spiritual life of the nation over the years. All kings were judged by Yahuah, by their relationship to the house of Yahuah and the priests therein. The king represented the kingdom. The priest represented the temple. The governmental and ecclesiastical were seen to run parallel in the offices of king and priest. So, Yahuah was not merely duplicating the tabernacle of Moses, was he? Wasn't merely duplicating, not just building another tabernacle, but actually amplifying all that was there with greater, richer, fuller, and more significant administration of divine truths. Big difference. The tabernacle of Yahuah speaks of Yahusha in his earthly walk, earthly ministry and esteem, while the temple of Yahuah speaks of Yahusha in his heavenly, divine ministry and esteem. So keep all this in your head while we go on, guys, the difference between the tabernacle and the temple. Why didn't they just build another tabernacle? Why? We're going to see why. We're understanding that there's a double portion, a double anointing. There's a lot more going on in the temple for the purpose of shadowing what Yahusha was going to do amongst his bridal fellowship in the world, yeah? Let's get down to the nuts and bolts. How did all the resources come together? The treasury and donations. Numerous vessels were used in the house of Yahuah. The charge of Yahuah to his people and the temple priesthood is given in Isaiah 52. Be clean, those that bear the vessels of Yahuah. Be clean, those that bear the vessels of Yahuah. We can take that to ourselves. Who is a living vessel of Yahuah, of Yahusha? We need to be clean. Yahuah wants his own, those in his great house, to be vessels of honor, delivered and suitable for the master's use, and prepared for every good work. Why do you think the behavior revolution has been talking about being clean, checking your thoughts about the violence, aggression that comes through our behavior lately? Because we need to be vessels of honor. Our mouths need to honor Yahusha, not be vulgar and crass and aggressive. Yahuah chooses those who will be vessels unto him for his house and his people. He is the great potter and desires that vessels not be marred in his hand. So let's look at some of the spiritual significances of the various materials used in the temple of Yahuah. Now, if you want to pause the video and look at these charts here, you can. I'm not going to go through them. It's just taking you through all the different gold, silver, talents of it, all the different measurements that are in the scriptures and all the different vessels in the temple, all that. So if you want to pause it and study that yourself, do it now. Let's go on. But David got donations, he got people bringing stuff from everywhere, and he sent all his best men out to find all this stuff. Firstly, mainly it was gold. Gold speaks to us of deity, divine nature, the esteem of Yahuah in his set apartness. Gold has always symbolized deity, even pagan idolatrous feasts which corrupted the truth Yahuah gave to Israel. This metal was especially used in the most set apart place, as well as in the utensils listed above. All those utensils listed there, most of them were gold. Then we have silver. Silver is symbolic of redemption, atonement, and ransom money. It points to Yahusha, even as gold points to the Father Yahuah. Silver was used for the ransom money, the atonement for the being in the nation of Israel when they came out of Egypt. You had to buy back the firstborns, and there was all this redemption money going on and things like that. I won't get into it, but Yahusha, like Joseph, was sold by his brothers for silver pieces. Silver was used for the silver lampstands in the temple also. The bride is redeemed not with silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Messiah. So silver played a huge part in the construction of the temple. Then we had brass. Brass is found to be symbolic of judgment against sin and against the self. That's why the altars were made of brass. The set-apart spirit is titled the spirit of judgment and the spirit of burning. Interesting, I didn't know that. Set-apart spirit is often called the spirit of judgment and the spirit of burning. Certainly does, doesn't he? Judges us first, the bride, and burns what he doesn't like. The heavens were to become as brass and iron against Israel if they sinned against Yahuah and his word. The feet of Yahusha walking in his assembly are as brass, burning in a furnace. There was also the serpent of brass, used to deal with Israel's sin. Brass is especially noted in both tabernacle and temple in their outer courts. So it's not as regal and royal as the gold and silver that were used inside, but outside where judgment occurs, you had to be judged and animals had to be sacrificed and sin had to be dealt with before you could get anywhere closer to the gold and the silver. Let's look at the iron. Iron is often linked with brass and is symbolic of strength and endurance, also judgment and inflexibility. David prepared iron in abundance for the nails for the doors and gates of the temple. The heavens would be as iron and brass, or brass and iron against Israel if they sinned against Yahuah. Is that scripture again? So David, don't forget, David prepared all this. Solomon and his men put it all together over the course of 7 odd years and a bit more, but David prepared everything. Just because he wasn't allowed to be the final, constructor of it, he still saw it as his own, or as Yahuah's that he was serving Yahuah in. Then we have gemstones. Precious stones were used in the temple in the walls, as well as in the garments of the high priest, in particular the breastplate of judgment. They speak of the various gifts of the Spirit, the esteem of the bride, and the preciousness of Yahuah's people and their works. Interesting when you're looking at all the shadows. That's what all the gemstones symbolized looking through the scriptures. Then we had stones, quarried stones used for the building of the temple speak of believers taken from the quarries of this world and prepared by the training of the Spirit to be placed in the house of Yahuah. We don't just get placed in there, do we? We get worked on away from the temple site. We get hewn out of the rocks and we get shaped and molded, and we'll talk about that a bit more. But it was a silent construction. A lot of what's going on in us is inside. It's violent, it's painful, it's agony, but it's silent, it's within. It's secret, isn't it, what's going on? No one really knows the process that's going on inside you, the decisions you're making for Yahusha. Timber. In contrast to acacia wood used in the tabernacle of Moses, the temple used timber from the cedar, the fir and the olive trees more especially. Trees in scripture point also to Yahusha and his assembly, his fellowship. The bride is likened to a tree planted by the rivers of water. Many scriptures speak of trees and use such in symbolic manner. As Israel gave free will offerings to Yahuah of their material substance, so the bride is to give freely to Yahusha. What's this? As Israel gave free will offerings to Yahuah of their material substance, so the bride is to give freely to Yahusha, present themselves and all they have to him as a free will, voluntary offering. In the temple, Yahuah used actual materials to build his house. However, the material he uses today is people. Yahuah's people are the material he uses to build a spiritual house, his new blood covenant temple. The various materials from the various kingdoms all symbolize some redemptive truth in his house. The various materials from all the various kingdoms that David and Solomon sourced them from, they all symbolize some redemptive truth in his house, in his temple, and all showed some aspect of his esteem, his majesty, his divinity. That's why all these different things were chosen for a reason. It had to be done to the pattern. Likewise, all immersed believers today, out of every kindred, tongue and tribe and nation, who are built into Yahusha's house, they manifest some aspect of his esteem in new blood covenantal and redemptive truth, if they are willing to give over, if they're willing to surrender, if they're willing to die to their flesh and let him shine through them, just as he did in the temple. Got that? All these things we're looking at are shadows. It's fascinating to look at the shadows and the patterns, because we understand how obsessive, it would be a good word, obsessive Yahuah was with getting everything laid out in order, because he knew what all those different things were going to shadow one day. Yahusha and his bride. So we need to do the same thing. How do we do it? A divine operation must be performed. If we're going to do all this here and be used as Yahusha's house, a vessel for him, firstly, a divine operation must be performed. The old man, old heart, old spirit must be removed, and a new ticker installed with the latest software upgrades and hardware power packs to prepare the new temple for its transformation. You're going to be transformed from a lump of clay and dirt, which all human beings are, into something divine. You can't just cross over from one dimension to the other without some kind of rebirth, without some kind of divine operation. And that divine operation doesn't do it all at once. It does the spirit and the heart, but then the seed is planted. That seed gives you the latest software upgrades and hardware power packs to prepare the new temple for its transformation from mortality to immortality. To be ready to receive the full esteem of Yahusha in consummated marriage, an unclean vessel, whether immersed or not, even though immersion makes you acceptable and approachable and you can enter through your portal now, if we received the full consummated marriage power of Yahusha, we will be frackled up because we are still in our flesh unclean. Got that? So that's why it's in seed form. And that seed is pretty powerful, isn't it? The power of the Spirit burning. What was it further up there? Burning and judging within us. That's what you're going through. Any bridal member that's not going through burning and judgment inside them ain't the bride. Because look, you got to go through a complete process of transformation. From now to the time Yahusha returns, you're going to be transformed. So that when he gets here, it's just going to be flick into immortality because you've proven yourself and he can trust you. So to summarize this was a blowout. Solomon's temple was covered in pure gold, and today would cost over $150 billion to build today. $150 billion if they were going to try and build that structure today, because of all the precious gold, silver, gems. So how invaluable was it? Priceless. Look at it. But Yahusha thinks you are more valuable. Yahusha thinks you are a more valuable place to dwell in. Got that? That's how he feels about you. That's how he feels about me. $150 billion. I don't know any buildings in the world that cost $150 billion. I mean, this is with inflation, of course. The people who did this research allowed for the time difference. But what do you think about that? That's how he feels about you, guys. He would rather live in you than in that. And that's why we are being prepared to be fully consummated with him. So understand that that's what you're going through. Face everything you see around you. Face it. Because if you can see, the devil's coming for you. And you've got to be so cunning. There's a cloud of witnesses watching every word you say. And you've got to be so careful. So I love you guys. We'll be back with more details about the Temple of Solomon next week. See you.
Check it out. Check it out. Ain't it funkin' now? Ain't it funkin' now? Ain't it funkin' now?